Hello, everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name is Rita Trichur. I'm a senior business writer and columnist with a report on business at the Globe and Mail. I'm really pleased to be here today to lead our next panel discussions, and it'll dive into how the Canadian business community can create inclusive talent pipelines that reflect the diversity of our population. The lack of women in executive roles is due in part to an inadequate pipeline of future female leaders. Executive development has a role to play, but equally important are the approaches of managers and business leaders in identifying and cultivating high potential candidates. What strategies are proving to be the most effective? We're going to hear from an esteemed panel of experts on that subject today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session. I'd first like to introduce everyone to Christine Discola, Director, Country and Human Resources Officer for Citibank in Canada. She is a member of Citi Canada's executive leadership team. Christine drives the company's talent development, diversity, equity and inclusion, and change management portfolios, among many other mandates. So please welcome Christine. Next, we'd like to welcome Dr. Sonja Kang, who holds the Canada Research Chair in Identity, Diversity, and Inclusion. She is also an Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Human Resource Management at the University of Toronto. She has other titles too. She's a Faculty Research Fellow at the Rotman School of Management's Institute for Gender and the Economy, and Chief Scientist of Organizations at Rotman's Behavioral Economics and Action Research Center. Welcome, Sonia. Next, please welcome Brittany Forsyth, Chief Talent Officer at Shopify. Brittany began her career at Shopify in 2010 as an office manager and built the company's talent function from the ground up. As we all know, the local startup started with 20 employees in Ottawa and has grown into an international team of over 5,000 people. She is also partnered to take Shopify public in 2015 and has managed the acquisition and integration of 8 companies over the last 9 years. So hello, Brittany. Thanks for joining us for today. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Agapi Gassessa, Executive Director of C Centre for Young Black Professionals. The C Centre is a Toronto-based charity that works to address the economic and social barriers that affect Black youth. Agapi has over a decade of experience working to enhance the lives of marginalized youth through her work with the Toronto Community Housing, United Way of Greater Toronto, and as the Executive Director of POV 3rd Street. So welcome, Agapi. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. This is such an important discussion. So Sonia, I want to start with you. One of the things that we hear a lot as an explanation for the lack of women in executive roles is that the pipeline is lacking in qualified candidates, but you say that's a myth. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for organizing, for inviting me. So in terms of your question, I've studied this most in STEM fields, but really what I'm going to say applies across other high-skilled industries as well, which is that the representation of women and girls across these fields has been increasing over time. Albeit that's been slow, but if we look and see the pipeline early on for girls, let's say in these fields, compared to boys, girls and women tend to be in these fields and do just as well as boys and men in these fields kind of throughout the pipeline. And so when we talk about the problems with the pipeline, we're really focusing on women and girls and thinking like, oh, why are they just passively leaking out of the pipeline? But what's really happening is that there's a real problem there, that they're being pushed out. There's a lot of pressures there that are pushing them out of the pipeline. So this might be things like discrimination. It could be things like just having a bad social climate for them. It could be not feeling like they belong. And that happens throughout this pipeline, right? So recruitment, selection, evaluation, performance, all the way through to compensation, promotion, all these different things. And so when we're thinking about this analogy, I do find that it's not the greatest analogy, because if you think about an actual leaking pipeline, right, you wouldn't, if there's water leaking out of a pipeline, you're not going to try and like treat the water differently or get the water to flow differently or change something about the water. you're actually going to try and plug those holes, right? And that's where I think we need to focus. Or really what we need to do is replace that piping altogether, right? Rebuild that system from the ground up to create a space in which everyone can stay inside and not be forced out through those holes.
Okay, great. Agapi, I want to bring you in at this point because I want you to pick up on Sonia's comment about the lack of pipeline being a myth. You and I, when we were preparing for today's event, talked about how sometimes, companies can be too passive. It's not enough to just, post for a job. Can you just offer your opinion on what needs to change and what's happening?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think number one, the assumption that in particular Black communities, which is really where I represent and do my work is that there's no one qualified enough to do this, when really I think that when we're looking at the same type of schools, the same type of places that we're consistently going to the same pool of water for to find folks, those are generally not diverse places to begin with. So I think employers really need to think outside of the box. Where are talented folks in the BIPOC community actually interacting with each other? There's the BBPA, there's organizations like ours, See, that you can reach out to and have that conversation. And then to speak to the point of people who may not be there as of yet, I think number one thing I often say to people is our community doesn't have a people gap. So there's plenty of people, right? And so the easy part of this equation is to skill them up. And so interacting and finding partnerships with community organizations or folks who can train these communities up are really vital to making sure that you have a consistent pipeline of folks and that you're not only training them, but you're also creating an inclusive environment when they show up.
Okay, that's a great point. And I am, really interested in the fact that a lot of your work focuses on BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. Can you please just, elaborate a little bit more on some of the challenges or additional barriers that Black women face in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, being a Black woman, I think I could speak to this really well. But I think that people really need to understand that when we're talking about these isms, sexism, racism, all of these things are experienced very differently. So as a Black woman, I experience sexism very differently than I experience racism. Oftentimes, I'm really just trying to get people to accept me for being a person of color, a Black person, and the respect that is due there as an equal. And then I have the next hurdle, which is being able to be seen as an equal as a woman. And oftentimes we mold these things together, not to mention if I was a member of the LGBTQ community, I would be experiencing that differently. Layer that on if I had a disability, I would also experience all four of those things very, very differently. And so I think what happens is we do a disservice to others and ourselves when we clump all of these things together, because really when you think about the feminist movement, for instance, as a Black woman, it's hard for me to see myself in that, because when everyone was marching for gender equality, Black folks could not vote. We didn't have rights. We weren't seen as equals. So it's very hard for us to find ourselves on the same footing ground. So I think it's really important as we're talking about these things is to understand that people experience these things very differently and can experience triple or double the trauma as they're trying to navigate. So it's really to address each item one by one. And as organizations are thinking about plans, you need to think about across the board, making sure that you're addressing all of these isms equally.
That's a great point. Intersectionality is such a key component of this discussion. And our analysis in terms of how companies can do better. Christine, in preparation for this call, we talked about the idea or the perception of fit. Women are often passed over for promotions because they aren't considered the appropriate cultural fit for the role. What are your thoughts on that? And, what are the solutions to this problem?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Agapi and Sonia, you spoke so eloquently about the pipeline myth. I think connected to that and equally important is the meritocracy myth. this view that promotions are done in a process that is free of bias, that's based on equal opportunity, equitable opportunity. And we know that's unfortunately not always the case. We know that 2/3 of promotions go to men rather than women, and that's not because women are any less qualified or any less ambitious. And we know that that happens especially at the switch from the to the first rung of the ladder to the management roles. And so we need to work hard to solve it. And one of the things we need to think about is moving away from hiring like for like, moving away from replacing the outgoing incumbent who is quite often a man, especially at the senior levels of an organization, with someone that looks exactly like that person with the same experience, same education, same background. We need to think much more broadly. And at Citi, we believe that accountability and transparency are key to that. A couple of things to note that we've done. We set out representation goals 3 years ago, and this was for our global workforce, that 40% of our AVP, assistant vice president to managing director, would be women globally. That was an ambitious goal, but also an attainable goal. And by the end of this year, we're hoping to reach that goal. So by putting that out there and really working towards that and holding people accountable and measuring our progress has been really powerful. Our incoming analyst class, we've reached that 50-50 split between male and female, which is really encouraging and a very proud moment for us. The other thing that I'd want to highlight is our work on diversity panels and diversity slates. And I know that's a common approach across many firms. It's certainly not new for Citi, but what we've done is we've enhanced it. So while we've had in the past the need that when one woman would be on a panel at least and one woman would be on a slate, we've upped that ante, and now we're requiring 2 women to be on a slate and 2 women to be on the panel. And we realize that having just one isn't really moving the needle. And so we need to ensure and enhance our process there. And of course, we've supported those efforts with unconscious bias training across the entire firm. And we've just recently rolled out an inclusive hiring workshop that looks at all of the pitfalls across the entirety of the recruiting process from start to finish, including simple things, but really powerful things like how you can, position your job descriptions and the questions that you're asking and the assumptions that you're making through interviews, et cetera. So we're hoping a combination of those factors will get to that.
Christine, I absolutely agree with you. In the year 2021, there's no room for manels anymore. So, okay, Brittany, I wanted you to add your thoughts to this idea of perceptions of fit for women in leadership roles. I mean, from your vantage point at Shopify, how has the company tackled that issue, and what are your thoughts on how to overcome the hurdle?
Yeah, I think there's so many great things stated already, so I might repeat a little bit. But I think for me, the important thing that we've really focused on is that whether it's inbound of hiring new or promotions or internal movement, it's really important to understand the play of unconscious biases and how to have a proper process and structure around it to bring in more viewpoints and different perspectives when making core decisions. I think ultimately there is one decision maker when you go through this process, but it's important to raise up different views along the way to ensure that you're making an informed and great opinion, or a decision rather. And I think, from my vantage point over the years, it's never malicious, it's ill-informed. It's an assumption someone has made or an opinion someone has because they haven't done the research or they haven't a bias that they're unaware of. And so for us, having the conversation, especially when it's promotions or internal movements, to say, okay, what's leading you to that decision? Because generally it's the tactics that are different, but they're just as valuable. So I specifically remember one conversation, we were talking about 2 final candidates for promotion. One was female and one was male. And the male was perceived to be more bold, more confident, he gets shit done. And it's interesting because from my perspective, the female actually was able to get more things done, but she brought more people along the journey. And so the perception was, the female is spending more time bringing people along. It's slower. It's not getting there. But in actuality, I think she was able to bring people along so that when the decision was made, it moves faster. And so in sharing that and challenging others' opinions, in calling people out when you see a bias, I think that's really important to have an informed decision. And then a few of you stated, process and kind of guardrails. I think, diverse slates is so important. And kind of looking at the pipeline and understanding where it's leaky, and then actually going in to dig further and have an appropriate solution. We were just putting a posting out for some senior female engineers, well, just senior engineers. And what we noticed as we dug in was female senior engineers were dropping out of the process. And as we dug in further and further, we realized that at one point we added a moment where you needed to submit a technical contribution so that we could assess the technical skills, because we wanted to bring in more technical senior leaders. We realized through that, though, female senior engineers were dropping out. They didn't want to do that process. And so our solution was to create more opportunities to submit technical credentials, whether it was homework or interview in a different format. And we were able to drive those numbers back up and have an equal pipeline coming in. And so with that, I just think it's so important that we dig a little further and we don't just pass over it or think it's not, just move towards the end. I think it really takes time and insight and just custom solutions to ensure that the funnel coming in and then the pipeline, once internal, moving up, includes a diverse slate of candidates and allows for equal opportunity.
You raise a very good point. I've seen this in journalism, which is obviously my profession, this idea that confidence is often misconstrued as competence. And so if you are brash and bold, people automatically assume that you know what you're doing. Perhaps women tend not to thump on their chest as much. I mean, some people are different. Sonia, I wanted to, also get your thoughts on this idea of, the cultural fit, or a woman being not the right fit for the role. What do you see as the solution to dismantling that barrier?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with what's been said already about the homophily piece. So people tend to like people who are like them, and that's really how they assess fit. So fit is really just like a code word for saying, I like this person because they're like me. And so I also feel that one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that there are really higher standards and barriers to entry for women, right? Especially for women whose identities intersect with other marginalized identities. So that could be like race or ability status or gender identity, for example. So if we are looking for homophily and we're also not realizing that the women that we do have to choose from are just going to be, this is the myth of the meritocracy that we were just talking about as well. They're going to be better just by virtue of having to meet those higher standards and kind of leap over those higher barriers. So they're going to be better than a lot of the sort of more mediocre options that you might have. And so if you're still passing them over, just looking for people that are like you in the service of fit, it's like you're almost trying to discriminate against women, like you're trying to do it. And so I think the way that you avoid this is with structure. So structure helps you to avoid homophily. So that means things like, knowing what you're going to be, knowing what your criteria are before you start evaluating, using the tools that are out there to help you evaluate resumes in a more fair way. So for example, there's a lot of third parties that you can work with. An example of that is called BE Applied. I really like that company. They basically take all your resumes and sort them for you in a way that you can evaluate everyone horizontally rather than vertically. So vertically is like your traditional way that you look at someone's CV or resume, where you're looking at the whole thing. And that can really be subject to all kinds of different biases. So you might see a school that you really like, or a neighborhood that you really like, or some position, some indicator, a name that sounds like a man or a name that sounds white. And all of a sudden, you have this bias that kind of clouds your judgment of the rest of it. If you look at them horizontally, you're looking at everyone's education, and then you're making a choice about those things, ranking them, you're looking at everyone's experience. And then the other piece is interesting because, Brittany mentioned that this was something that didn't work for them, but I think it's worth experimenting with as well to see how it works, but having those kinds of more skills-based assessments. So really asking people about skills that you're looking for rather than things that are just going to tell you whether or not they're similar to you. Other things that were mentioned were things like quotas, which everywhere that quotas have been implemented, they've worked really, really well. Changes to job advertisements work really well as well. We have some research looking at a company where they were hiring for a job which tended to be really dominated by men. And we just changed a few things in the job advertisement to make it less masculine and just neutral in terms of gender. And we were able to increase the number of women who applied over a 6-month period. And it was just very small tweaks like that, that you can make all these changes in the structure, the way that things are set up, so that you're not falling back on fit.
Okay, that's a great point. One of the things I've said to people is you can set the performance bar as high as you want. I have no problem clearing it. Just don't sucker punch me on my way to clearing that bar. Agapi, I want you to come in at this point because obviously the issue of cultural fit or fit for a role can be more complicated for BIPOC women. And so I wanted you to weigh in on this issue of fit and the barrier that's presented. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I often tell people the responsibility isn't always only on the individual to assimilate themselves into a work culture that may, if we're talking about fit, what are they fitting into? And if it is that they're not fitting into a very masculine or in this case, not a culturally comfortable place, then likely the atmosphere needs to change rather than the person. And I think if we look at diversity and inclusion and why it's beneficial for businesses, it's beneficial to your bottom line. And I often think that people think that when we talk about things like quotas, people think, then they change their mind over to, oh, the only reason why this person has this job is because they're a Black person or they're a woman or whatever the case is. When really, in fact, we need to change our minds about how we're viewing diversity and inclusion. It's actually, studies show that organizations that have diverse leadership, and that's in gender, abilities, et cetera, race, are 19% more profitable than ones that are not. It affects your bottom line. So if you are a smart business owner or a smart leader, you're going to start thinking about, if we only have men and we have this very masculine atmosphere, or we only have, a culture that embraces, white culture in most instances, then what you're going to end up getting is not as much business as you could if you were to open that up. And I mean, an example that I often use is the atmosphere you're creating in your workplace can affect anyone, no matter what they look like. And once I was doing a session with an organization, and a lot of the work that they did, a lot of conversations happened on a golf course, and there was a lot of drinking. That's just socially how they did business. And one of the employees there, who was a man who identified as someone from the LGBTQ community, and he was a white male, but he also was a recovering alcoholic. And he said, this atmosphere is not good for me because number one, I don't like to play golf, but everyone assumes I do. And number two, having alcohol at every single event that we're at is not conducive to my sobriety. And so we really need to examine the atmosphere that we're creating and not have the onus on the individuals who are entering in. Does this work? Are we really adopting the true nature of diversity and inclusion? And I think that's going to be the barometer whether fit really does make sense, whether you need to shift or the folks that you're recruiting do.
That's a great point, because actual business decisions get made, on the golf course, at after work drinks, around the smoking pole. And sometimes people are not, women aren't present for these, discussions. I mean, they may start up as being innocent enough, but actual decisions about, what the business is going to do next happen there. And it affects who has power and influence. Christine, I think you want to weigh in on this. So I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, no, there's a lot I want to weigh in on, but Agapi, I mean, thank you for those comments and picking up on your theme on, the atmosphere that we're creating, right? That's the culture, it's the language we're using, it's the values we're putting out there as an organization. And this whole concept of on the golf course and after work drinks, I mean, I think that's slowly going away. I certainly see it in banking. And, I want to just give a shout out because we've got our new CEO, Jane Fraser, who was just appointed, broke the glass ceiling, as you all know. And if you haven't looked her up, please do. She's quite phenomenal. But she has started to change the language that we use at a global organization of 200,000 people in almost 100 countries. It's not easy to do, but she's starting to inject a lot more empathy in communications, a lot more humanity in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, certainly the pandemic has lent to that. And I know a lot of the narrative that leaders are positioning right now have that. But I think it's a real culture shift for us. And it started well before she was put in place, actually, even by her predecessor. But the words that we use, the language that we put out there, the leadership principles that we reward are so absolutely critical. She often is quoted as saying, we want to be a bank with a soul. That's redefining the purpose. It's not just about generating revenues quarter after quarter. It's not just about shareholder value. It's about how we can contribute to the larger good, to the communities we serve, to the planet, to environmental causes, to raising up youth and reskilling. There's a lot out there. And I think because of her voice, it's naturally impacting the behaviors and the values and our systems and processes around how we shape diversity, inclusion, and equity, social justice, racial inequality issues. So she's combining the language with the actions to support it. So I just wanted to put it out there because I think leadership's voice and the leadership shadow is so critically important to how everything gets done in the organization, as everyone knows.
Absolutely. Tone from the top is absolutely important on any business issue, but especially when it comes to inclusion. I want to move over to audience questions because I see a lot are coming in and I want to get to as many of those as possible. So the first one is, earlier today, a speaker mentioned that gender parity in the workplace is moving at the speed of will, which I agree with. We've been having the same discussion for decades, and we're always told these things take time. Why isn't time up yet? I'm going to start with Brittany on that.
I love the real talk of that question. I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, it's interesting. Before jumping on this, I was looking at our data again at Shopify, and I realized what we have out in the public is from 2019 disclosed. And I was looking at 2021. We were discussing, can I talk about more recent data? And there's a timeline of accruing it and having it all vetted and everything. And so the advice was, let's pull back. But what I can say is, I think that's part of the problem, is that data is always lagging and it's pushing out. And I think we have to get more in front of it and be more comfortable having the conversation in the moment than waiting till after the point to kind of push it out and talk about it. Because it does take time, but we need to be more vulnerable and exposed to talk about what's working and what's not working right now so that we can iterate and expand and change. I can say, though, that I do believe that it is getting better, and I can only really speak of my experience at Shopify. And I know that based on a lot of practices we put in place, whether that be diverse slates or really pushing new initiatives through our ERGs, we have seen our numbers go up quite a bit. And that's been really great to see, that when you put the work in and you put your effort there, so the will is there, that there will be impact as a result. I think the problem is, though, a lot of companies are saying what they think they need to say instead of actually walking the talk. And so I would encourage everyone to walk the talk and do what's right and drive some new initiatives, because I can tell you there's a place for women. There's tons of value in women in leadership roles, and the more women in these type of roles, the more women we will have coming up in these type of roles. And so, yeah, I think we just need more of it.
Okay, here's another question from the audience. I'm going to direct this one at Sonia because you're an academic and you've studied this. This is interesting. Is there a training gap, or are we simply not taking the same risks on women or BIPOC employees as we take on white men? We seem to feel the need for development plans for women, but men whose experiences are no different than their female colleagues seem to be naturally qualified and only need development plans once they've been promoted. Can you comment on this?
So I would say in terms of this gap, I think it links back to what I was saying earlier about women, especially those whose identities intersect with other marginalized identities, are held to these higher standards. And in academia, we refer to these as prove it again groups. So it's basically like you're asked over and over and over and over to prove that you're supposed to be there, to prove that you're worthy of being there, to prove that you're just as good as everyone else. And then people wonder why, people end up having things like imposter syndrome. It's because you're asking them like over and over and over, do you really belong here? So I think that is part of that. It's based on that kind of belief. And so again, the solution is to build that into structure. So if you want to have training required for certain people in different roles, you have to have that required for everyone, right? So no one just gets a free, pass through the door where it's like, oh, okay, you didn't do the training, but you get to do it anyway. If you have it for some people, you have to have it for everyone. And so I think that in terms of there being a training gap, we might have something more like a mentorship gap or a sponsorship gap, more so, where those women, who are really great and are really qualified and have great potential just as much as these men do, just don't have someone to really champion them and push them forward. So that might be more so where we see the gap. And I think, again, the solution to that is to build it into the structure. So a lot of my work focuses on these sort of system level process level instantiations of bias. And so if we kind of buy into the idea that a lot of the problems that we're seeing now are problems of design, then we have hope because we can redesign. And the redesign is all about embedding that structure so that we can overcome these different biases that we're seeing by making things consistent across everyone. So everyone has the same types of opportunities.
Okay, I think you've hit the nail on the head. And in terms of how we position people for success, and how we develop people and how we identify potential. Agapi, maybe you want to weigh in on this one too. Is this perception of there being a training gap, or are we just not taking the same risks on women and BIPOC?
Well, I do think that there is some merit to the training gap. I mean, the work that we do at Citi is solely workforce development in labor gaps in the Canadian market. And so I think that part of this is also that there's a lot of industries that just have been shut out to people of color. Like, there just hasn't been an option. And what's happening is people are coming into the Black community, especially as of recently, and putting like a big flag in there that says we're hiring, and we're all supposed to be like, yeah, we're saved. But really, they're industries that our community hasn't been welcome to, familiar with. And so I think there has to be an intentionality around it where you're reaching out to these communities and looking at not just hiring, but also investing in these communities and training folks on the ability to be able to take advantage of these things. I mean, especially as we, are in a new tech world, there's a lot of niche opportunities. Cybersecurity is on the rise. Like, these are all opportunities at Citi that we're looking at, and we're saying there's a labor gap here. And we're often looking for companies to invest in the young people that we serve so that they can get trained up and then, seek employment after the fact. And I think that's really the only way we're going to be able to get especially Black youth from the back of the unemployment line to at least the middle or close to the front, is by providing them with training opportunities and not just kind of going into a particular community and saying, we're hiring, so we're doing our part. It also means investment and the acknowledgement that there have been barriers to entering into these industries that are outside of their own doing and is inherently systemic. So I think investment in training is a vital part of this.
Okay, Christine, I want you to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. The only point that I'd really want to make to add to all the great points already made is we also have to be, I think, careful how we're defining training, right? Training in the traditional sense is evolving by the day, right? As we move, especially into the digital era, and in capability building, more so than just kind of your traditional training program. So I think, the point that Sonia made is one that's really profound and personally impactful to me, this notion of sponsorship. I think we talk about that a lot. We invest a lot in it. And I think we all have personal stories about how that's impacted us. So I think that's where our focus needs to be. It's certainly a combination of, the training and the traditional sense that we think about it, but just to evolve that to kind of real-time assignments, really investing in women to take on challenging roles and challenging assignments, and also working on actually ourselves, if I can be so bold and to say that, and to say we've got to work on being comfortable with the pit in our stomach that we get when we're being assigned new things, right? I think we've all had these pivotal moments in our career where it was, do we move ahead and really kind of seek out those opportunities, or do we step back? And I think part of that responsibility lies on our shoulders to feel comfortable with that and really validate our own perspectives, even though we may not be very at all close to what the role or the assignment is seeking.
Okay, we only have 5 minutes left. I can't believe it. This is such a great discussion, and you're all offering such wonderful, points of view and suggestions. I was hoping that maybe we could end by going to each of you quickly and you offering advice from your own personal journey through your career. What is the most important takeaway or lesson that you have learned? And, what is your advice for both companies and for women? Brittany, maybe we can start with you.
My advice, so I have this one moment that I always go back to where I had a pretty hard day. I work in HR. I had to exit 3 people in one day, and one of them was a good friend of mine. We're a small company, so the things you do. And I went in to update my CEO afterwards, and I started crying. It was a big day, and it was a lot. And I got really embarrassed, and I tried to leave and apologize because I knew growing up, that's not what you do. You don't cry in meetings. You don't show emotions. It's like, put your big kid pants on. And the CEO stopped me and said, like, it's okay to have tears. It's okay to be emotional. Today was a horrendous day for you. The day you don't have that is the day I don't know, like, I'll question whether you should have this role. And what it did for me is it pivoted this perceived weakness, this perceived aspect of growing up as a girl that I can't do this. This is a weakness. This is a challenge, and put it as a strength and put it as this is something good. And that day was a pivotal day because I think I start to soft skills, like, yes, it's foundational skills. It's strengths that I bring to a conversation. And so my advice would just be to kind of pause, zoom out, and reframe. What can you bring to the table, and try and let go some of that baggage that we get brought up with over the years.
That's a great point. In our last 3 minutes, Sonia, I'm going to ask you to share your journey as well. And then Christine, I'll go to you. And then Agapi, I'll give you the last word. Go ahead, Sonia.
Okay, sure. I'll just be quick. So I would say for me, definitely, I mean, this sounds like kind of idealistic, but listening to your intuition and trusting yourself. I think we're taught to question ourselves a lot and to question the way that we're feeling, but I would say pay attention to those emotions. They're there for a reason. If you feel like something isn't right for you, you don't fit there, there's a reason why, and it's not because of who you are. It's usually not because of something that you need to change. It's because something in the environment needs to change. And so, picking up on Brittany's point, I think a lot of this is socialized, and we're raised to like be strong and, not pay attention to those sorts of things. But I would say that those are such a useful piece of information for you to know whether a workplace that you're in is right for you or not.
Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, Rita. I mean, all great points. I think there are such critical, pivotal moments in a woman's career, right? They're defining moments, and they're small things. It's walking into a boardroom where you're the only woman in the room, speaking against what the crowd is saying, and they're all men in the room, announcing your pregnancy, returning from maternity leave, asking for a salary increase, negotiating that. All those little moments are so defining, and how an organization responds is really critical. So make sure that you're in an organization that's responding correctly. If not, do something about it and try to influence that change. And the motto that I've lived by throughout my career, it was given to me by an MD years ago who I've never forgotten. It was jump right in. In those moments of fear, uncertainty, or hesitation, jump right in. That's been a motto that validated me as a person about my perspectives and my skills in the moment.
Yeah, and just to kind of speak to my own personal experience, I think that I became an executive director of an agency at age 26. And when they offered me the job, the first thing I said was like, I don't know if this is a good idea, like for you. And I think that one of the biggest lessons that I learned in that moment was you just have to, don't always look at like the job description and what you think that you can't do and focus on the negatives. I think that believing in yourself, especially women of color, we're constantly taught to be 10 times better, 10 times greater, try harder. Like it's in you, like as children, we've grown up to like, my mom would always be like, do you want to be the best of the best or the best of the worst? So we've been trained to be the best of the best. And I think a lot of times, because I think the biggest problem that we face is that we believe the lie that has been told to us about us. And I think we really need to reflect on that and think, is it in me? And to be able to really look at the job or the opportunity and weigh it out to what your actual skills are, because the society will have us thinking that we're unable when that's really not in fact the case.
Thank you all so much for your insights today and for your frank talk about this issue. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today for this most excellent discussion. I'm now pleased to introduce to you my colleague, Robin Doolittle, who is an investigative reporter and best-selling author here at the Globe and Mail. She's going to lead the next session in today's program. So take it away, Robin.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Rita, living legend Rita. I'll figure out how to use Zoom in the next pandemic. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. We're gonna have kind of more of a fireside style chat. So as Rita mentioned, I'm a reporter at the Globe. And for the last several months, some colleagues and I have been publishing a series, including Rita, called The Power Gap, which is looking at gender inequities in the workplace. We've collected available data about women in leadership roles within Canada's public institutions and also within the business community as a whole. As you can imagine, women are still facing challenges when it comes to obtaining roles at the executive level, particularly when they reach the middle management tier of an organization. So the glass ceiling is not just at the top. They're not making it through the middle. There are stories of success as well, though, and insights from women who have made it to the top levels of management, and they can help us understand, strengthen, and support inclusion programs. And today, we have two very impressive female executives joining us to discuss their own paths to leadership. I'm going to introduce them both and then give them a quick chance to introduce themselves as well. So first, I'd like to introduce everyone to Alicia Calvert. She's the managing partner of markets and accounts and a member of the Canadian Executive Committee for EY. Alicia has been with EY for more than 25 years and works on solving complex business issues for the firm's clients and helps them implement transformative changes. So please welcome Alicia. And next, we'd like to welcome Atria Lewis, a partner at McCarthy's Litigation Group in Toronto. You may recognize Atria from last month's cover of Report on Business magazine, where she was named one of ROB's inaugural change makers. In 2019, she was elected as a bencher for the Law Society of Ontario, and she specializes in litigating for commercial disputes, professional liability, and intellectual property cases. Welcome, Atria. Okay, why don't Alicia, you go first? Just if I missed something relevant you want to discuss. See, mute is hard.
So
right?
now I have to get off mute myself. You're absolutely right. So, thank you for that introduction, Robin. So I've been a partner at the firm for about 15 years, and I've been on the executive committee for the last 6. So the executive committee at a firm like ours is a committee of 8 partners, managing partners who really run the firm. So think of it as the equivalent of the C-suite in corporate Canada. On the executive, I've had 2 roles over my tenure. First was the managing partner for tax, so running our tax practice for Canada. And now I've moved over and I'm running our markets organization. So really in charge of market strategy, sales, brand for the firm as a whole. So and I would also say that I do have a 22-year-old daughter. So I've got lots of experience with, raising a family and being a leader at the firm, being a partner. So thank you for having me today.
Yeah, amazing. Can't wait to get into it. Okay, Tricia, over to you.
Yeah, so I would just say to those of you who don't know, a bencher is the fancy word that lawyers use for a director. So it means I'm on the board of directors of the Law Society, which is the regulating body for lawyers. And it's pretty significant because you can't practice law in the province without being a member of the Law Society. And I was recently made partner at my firm at McCarthy Tatro, and I also have a daughter, and she is 7 months now.
I can't still believe you're doing all these. I feel like you're everywhere right now and you have a 7-month-old. So, okay, let's dive into it. We're on limited time here. We're talking today about how women can get to the top. You're both the top of your field. Let's identify the problem first. What do you think are the primary issues that women are encountering? So the Power Gap series showed that, women are really struggling to make it through middle management. So it's not even just that they can't get to the very top, they're kind of getting stuck on the way. Are you seeing that in your organizations, or what are you encountering here?
So I guess I'll start. I'm definitely seeing it within the world of law. One metric that most law firms like to subscribe to is having 25% of their partners be women. And that's a lofty goal for most firms, and that's not even 50-50. So when you pause to think about
25% is the goal?
I think pretty universally across Bay Street, yeah. And so when you pause and you think about that for a moment, the goal isn't even to reach parity. And that suggests there are some fundamental, deep-seated problems. And I think they start early and they continue on. So, there's the lack of development of skills, especially in law, which is an apprenticeship. It's a training-based type of work. And if you don't have access to mentors and sponsors, then you're not probably getting the access to the work opportunities that you need for your skill development over time. And then over time that plays out. I think, one thing that we're starting to realize too is there's also barriers associated with intersectionality. So when we talk about women, we can't just be talking about white women. We need to be talking about, or straight white women. We need to be talking about all kinds of women. And I think we're now starting to realize that there needs to be that lens, and that's been a barrier that's been around for a long time. And of course, people talk about family, but I think that's only a piece of the problem, frankly.
I agree with you on that, Tricia. It's a piece of the puzzle. And I do think, Robin, when you look at kind of the work you've done around the power gap, you've identified that it's not an easy issue. It's not one thing, it's many, many things that are causing the kind of systemic issues that we see. And I know that, 25 or 30%, whatever they're targeting, doesn't seem ambitious, but you've also got to remember a lot of the partners are partners for 25 years. So you've got to look back to what the practices were 25 years ago to really understand some of those metrics overall. I'm not making excuses for it. Like, we definitely have to do better, but there are some kind of fundamental issues behind that. I guess if I, reflected back on some of the things in my career that I thought were kind of barriers for me reaching leadership, and a few jump out. One is, unconscious biases, I think, are very, very important for us to understand. Those are the things that are, create different behaviors and stereotypes that if we don't acknowledge them and understand them, they can influence our decision-making around what opportunities we give to women. And so very slowly, little by little, we take away the opportunity for women to advance, which causes their careers to stall at that middle management level. So you really need to be aware of them. And the thing about unconscious biases is both women and men have them that stop women advancement. So you've got to really think about those things and how you're making decisions. And I know as a firm, we really put a lot of processes in place and a lot of checks and balances and accountability around making sure we're not letting those kinds of things get into our decision making. I guess the other thing I just would touch on really quickly is I do think women have a lot of thinking that stops themselves from advancing. So that self-limiting kind of behaviors that we do have for ourselves. So I think back on the year I made partner. And I actually wasn't on the list or the pipeline to be partner that year. And it's a very secretive process at the firms as to who's on the pipeline, but I'd heard through the grapevine that some of my colleagues were on the list to be a partner. And that bothered me. And it bothered me because I thought I was just as qualified, I was just as smart, I worked just as hard, and I could contribute just as much as they could. So I went to my partner and I asked, like, why are they on the partnership list, but I'm not? And what I found out was, I'd made the assumption that if I worked hard, kept my head down, and I earned it, that the opportunity would be given to me. And what I realized is that like the other gentlemen who had been on the pipeline for partnership that year had asked for it. They put up their hand and said they wanted it. They made it clear their ambition. And they had those more informal sponsors and mentors that maybe I hadn't kind of created in my own career to get them onto that list. And so, I put up my hand and said, well, if that's what it takes, then I want to be a partner too. And sure enough, then I made it through to partner that year. But I really learned a lesson about being more proactive about my own career, putting up my hand, taking more risks, and making sure that, what my ambitions were known.
One thing actually that Alicia, you just said that I think resonates is just keeping track of what's going on amongst your peers. And I don't say this to be competitive, but one thing I say to a lot of junior lawyers is, keep track of the skill sets, number of trials you've done, number of discoveries you've done, number of X and Y, and see what your peers are doing, because that's the only way you're going to really know if you're falling behind. And Alicia was plugged in and smart and was told that there was this list going on and that she wasn't on it, and so she could take steps. But worse off are people who don't even know about the list, and then they get passed up, and then they're playing catch up later on.
I think that is so crucial. Just that being aware of what others are doing as well. I'm doing a story right now, like in the series. Don't tell anyone, I don't want to scoop myself, but like it's about academia, right? And one of the really interesting things that comes up a lot when you talk to female academics about why they start to fall behind is that the men form networks, maybe not even consciously, but they're attracted to people, not maybe attracted, but like they gravitate towards people who are like them, and they form networks and they write research papers together, and then they get published, and then they put each other as co-authors, which helps build their resume, which helps them get more funding, which helps them win more grants, which means to more research and more papers. And it's like this cycle. And in the reporting that I did on law, I heard that a lot on Bay Street as well, that, this is again, Atria, like kind of what you were talking about is people within leadership positions forming relationships with people that are like them. Maybe they're getting better files or not. I don't know, like maybe if I can go to you, Atria, like what are some of the barriers that you've encountered in your career, and how did you get through them, and how did you break through those old networks that maybe have been excluding you and people like you for a long time?
Yeah, so I think you're right that is a huge problem. One specific initiative my firm is doing, which I think is an interesting one, is they're centralizing work allocation. So it isn't just I like person X down the hall, they remind me of me, so I'm going to give them work. Now it's a centralized source. So if you have X assignment, you go to the centralized person who then divvies up the opportunity. So I think that's a helpful way. But speaking for my own experience, what really, I saw my progression three ways. So first, I really focused on skill building. And like I said, I kept track of what other people were doing and what I needed to be and how many trials that I needed to do. I think it's safe to say you don't make partner at McCarthy's unless you're an excellent trial lawyer. So I worked on that. Two, I worked on building relationships with people who would have my back. And more than just mentorship and teaching me, but the partnership admissions, a lot of these decisions are made when I'm not in the room. So I needed to make relationships with people who would advocate for me when I wasn't there. And then the third was I focused really strongly on building my profile. And it kind of happened a bit organically. I really was passionate about diversity and inclusion issues. And I think way before that became trendy or people were writing about it and talking about it. And so I really, used a lot of my spare time to write on those issues, to speak on those issues. And that helped build a profile for me beyond simply the fact that I was a lawyer at McCarthy's. And that really helped me in terms of getting, the people in senior leadership to notice who I am. So when, my name came up, they were like, of course, Atria, because I was a known entity.
I love that. The idea of your firm doing kind of very intentional things to try to break that cycle of sameness, and the idea of you just also, having to be awesome, and you are, and being awesome and undeniably awesome. And then also building your own personal brand. Alicia, I can't think of an industry, law's up there, but that is more male dominated than capital markets. The stories I've heard that I cannot report make my hair turn gray. How have you, what are some of the barriers you've encountered? Give us the good ones. Skip the top, give us the good ones and how you fought through them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually left the firm. So when I think about some of the things that were barriers, coming back to a little bit of what you're getting at there with the old boys club. So I had actually left the firm right after I had my daughter. So this was back, 22 years ago. And one of the reasons I left at the time was I really couldn't see within the partnership or leadership ranks anybody like me. At that time, it was white, male dominated. I'm sure there were women not in my office. They didn't have families. Like, clients were first, firm was first. They didn't seem committed to their own families at the time, but that was just my perception looking in. They played a lot of golf, and I hate golf. And so I just couldn't see myself in that kind of position. So I left the firm for a couple of years, and that actually taught me some really good lessons about myself, and that I can be really successful and I can succeed in my own way. So I had the opportunity to come back, and I did. And I was really clear on my priorities, that my daughter, my family were first. Work was second, because I really wanted to be great at what I did in life. I get a lot of satisfaction from that. But I just made it really clear what the boundaries were, and I stuck to it, and I was unapologetic by it. And then I just outsourced everything else. I didn't clean or cook or do laundry, but, there's a price to that. I drove an older car, but, you just kind of set those priorities and go with them and hold to them.
Was it received well when you were like, my life is not going to be work?
Absolutely. You know what? Absolutely. I have to say, I've had a lot of great partners that I've worked for over the years, a lot of great mentors. I think people really, truly want to do the right thing. But there is, aspects of it. And I think I shared with you a little bit earlier that, it took courage on my part to say, I'm going to go and do business development with men. So I'm not going to go to the golf course, or if, for the few times I played golf, I was clear, I hate golf. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pick up the ball. I'm going to walk. Probably after 9 holes, I'll just drive the cart, but I'm there to spend time and get to know you better. And just had to be not fearful of calling up a CEO or CFO and saying, hey, let's go for dinner. I just want to get to know you more. And some of those perceptions that might come with that. But I just, decided to get over myself and just do the things that everyone else was doing, because men weren't getting worried about that.
This is something I've heard a lot in interviews with women, just this, because you kind of touched on the building relationships, and especially in these businesses that are about building relationships. I know as a reporter, I've had situations developing sources who are in male dominated professions where I've had bad situations happen at night. And I switched it up, and I was like, I'm only going to do breakfast meetings with people that fall in this area, because there's no confusion there. There's no alcohol. It's eggs. Scrambled eggs are not that sexy. But I do think it's interesting, this idea of having to kind of go with this, going out and drinking well after work. And I've been talking with, a lot of female leaders who are also like, you know what? I don't want to hang out with people after work. I want to go home. I like my family. I like my kids. I don't want to see you. And I think that's just so interesting. It's they're like, we aren't the ones that need to change. They need to change. And I don't know, Atria, can you speak to that? How do you're in a client-driven business, and maybe you do want to go out and get away from your children. I mean, no judgment, but I do actually. Does anyone want to go sit in a park with me? But how do you grapple in this world?
I've completely rethought business development, and I've done it in a way that suits me. So, and it ranges. So, one of the biggest sources of business development for me, frankly, is this listserv that I'm a part of called the Black Female Lawyers in Toronto. and there's lots of referrals that are exchanged through there. And people wouldn't think of that as business development. I don't think my firm, before, you know, I started mentioning it, ever thought of it as a business development source, but it is. And that's something that I do. Incorporating partners and families into events is a big thing that I do. You know, people don't want to not hang out with their kids, but maybe they want to hang out with my kids and I want to hang out with their kids, and it's a family affair. And that's an easier business development approach. You know, it's whatever you're interested in. Like for me, business development is maybe going to Caravana with clients or other lawyers. So it's finding what you're interested in and making connections with people who can help you, frankly, but who are also interested in the same things. And that's how I think of business development. Of course, I participate in the more traditional activities that my firm participates in. But when I'm out there by myself trying to hustle business, I'm doing it in a very authentic way.
Alicia? Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, being authentic is really, really important in building relationships. You know, what you said really resonates with me. When my daughter was younger, I used to do a lot of business development with her and our clients, because my clients wanted to spend time with their kids on the weekends. So, you know, we would always get the box for the Saturday afternoon game. No one wanted the box for that. So you can invite, you know, clients with their kids. I think we went to a Hillary Duff concert, like all of those things that, you know, creates those opportunities, and they find those really special, right? Don't think I'd ever have gone to that otherwise. But so I think that those things are important. It's really kind of doing it aligned to where your passions are and what's important to you. So you don't have to do the traditional, you know, drinking in the evening. I'm not opposed to doing that either, by the way, but you don't have to do that. And if that's not what you want to do, you've got to do it your own. I think that the concept of business development is really daunting for a lot of women. But a lot of the business development I do are just the networks that I created all throughout my career. So the people who've been at the firm and left and gone out into industry, staying connected with them, they will become the clients of the future, and they will hire you because you've created a long-term relationship with them, and just staying connected in that way. So I think that it's not as daunting, doing great work for clients. You know, then they'll hire you again. And when they move, you know, you've multiplied your client base significantly. So it's not as daunting as people think.
And I think it's always, I mean, just to briefly circle back to kids, as I try to say whenever I do these things, like the status quo hurts everyone. It hurts men too. Like, you know, all the men I know are really devoted fathers, and they want to be good parents too. And it's, you know, that they ultimately would welcome, I think, that shift as well. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I mean, honestly, I think that most people want to get home to their families. They want to do something outside of work. They want a better balance. So it is shifting. And I think that the more women get into the leadership positions, the more at clients in corporations, as well as at firms like ours, that will change. So
we've got, you know, about 8 minutes left. We've got a couple audience questions, and if you are listening and have some questions, ask them. I think you have a mechanism to ask them. I don't know how you're going to ask them, but I'm getting questions sent to me, so you'll obviously know where to send them. But I'm going to put one to the both of you because I love this question. Have you ever had a bounce back from an unsuccessful moment of asking for compensation or a promotion, or where the decision felt like it was being based on being a woman in the workplace full of men? How did you regroup after that? So I'm going to rephrase it a little bit, but just like a bounce back moment. Like, I love, whether it's because you felt it was a woman, or that you were encountering a barrier or not, or even just a failure that you bounced back from.
Yeah, so for me, I will say I have lots of those bounce back moments, especially in court. You know, we talk about workplaces and barriers. I actually think the biggest barrier that I encountered in my daily professional life is in courtrooms. Oftentimes judges may not be receptive to me as counsel or as lead counsel. They have an impression of what lead counsel at a big commercial matter looks like. And so, you know, I take it in stride, and usually what I do is I tattle. Like, if something is not, if it doesn't seem okay, I will tell someone that I trust, and I will ask them, or they will volunteer to deal with it, whether or not it's a background conversation to be like, actually, that was probably not okay. That those actually can be pretty significant and pretty powerful, I find, to addressing issues. Sometimes I've had issues that are unrelated to me being a woman in the workplace or any other identity that I have. It's just, sometimes when you're in court, you get beat up by a witness, and that's just, you roll with it. So you learn, I think, and particularly as a trial lawyer, you learn to just to take it in stride and keep going, because you got to live to fight another day in court.
It's like in basketball, like don't think about the last play, just think about the next one.
Yeah.
Alicia?
No, I was just going to say roll with it too. I mean, I actually have been very fortunate. EY is a place that really believes in creating a culture of belonging. And while I've had a long career here and certainly been ups and downs, it's always generally been a very positive experience. And so I can't say that I could put, other than, the anecdotes around, becoming a partner, not being on the list, but those things weren't really a trouble to bounce back from. And so we really do try to make sure that everybody is consciously thought about in their career. So I can't actually say I've had a real bounce back moment, but I'm glad.
Have you ever had a real step in it moment?
Pardon?
Have you ever had a big step in it? Like, have you ever just stepped in it really bad?
Oh, a ton of time. Like what Trish said, like with clients, for sure. I mean, there's been a number of issues where, we're in a tough profession. I work in M&A, so it's very fast paced. And, as I don't know if this is because I'm a woman, but, whenever some big challenges come, I tend to dwell on them a lot and think about them, constantly for the next 24, 48 hours. But I've learned to let myself dwell for a period of time and then just move on and forgive myself and move on and forget about it.
Okay. I like this question too. And we'll do this for both of you. And maybe Alicia, you can go first on this one this time. Shareholders drive the need to focus, sometimes solely, on business results. How do women in C-suite leadership positions effectively work with their largely male board and shareholders to create room for D&I?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would say I'm very fortunate in that 40% of our executive committee is women, but that hasn't always been the case. As an organization, we're really anchored around, our purpose and our ambition, and that's really about driving long-term value for all of our clients, our people, society as a whole. So we are pivoting as an organization that way, but it takes a lot of effort. And so I myself am part of our inclusiveness committee. I'm in part of our corporate social responsibility. We're really trying to make changes.
And I think the demographics of the clients are changing. So I can think of a number of Black GCs, for example, and
general counsels.
Yeah, sorry, yes, general counsels, and they're the ones that pick, the large firms with whom they want to work with, and I think there's a lot of power that's shifting to the clients. So. I think it's a lot on them to say, no, I'm not going to hire firm X if you're not diverse, and stick to it. And I have seen clients who are like that. I've seen clients who've said, I don't like the staff that the team that you put before me. I want a new team. I want more diversity on that team. And I think that's really driving a lot of the inclusion, because there's now a business case for it. So I think, if you're trying to make the pitch to your C-suite, unfortunately, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes doesn't carry weight, but it's the business thing to do, because the clients are changing.
Have you seen a shift in your organizations? I mean, you've both been pushing for broader diversity for many years. Has it been an easier sell lately?
I've seen a massive shift in my organization, and one that I have to say I'm quite proud of. Especially people more junior to me, I'm seeing a lot more racialized talent, which is incredible. And part of it is being very thoughtful about it. The firm realized we have very few Black and Indigenous lawyers. And so now we have a summer program for first-year law students that is targeted to Black and Indigenous students. And so it's really about building our pipeline so that we have more than just a critical mass. We have a lot of talent from different groups. And I think I'm hopeful that is going to be persistent change.
Alicia, we've got 1 minute left. What are your thoughts?
It's not optional anymore, Robin. I think because our clients are pushing for it, but mostly because for our firm, we've recognized that if you have a diverse workforce, you're going to attract more talent, and you're going to make better decisions, and you're going to be more successful. And so, talent scarcity is one of our biggest issues. So we can't afford to alienate any part of the population, and we need to make sure that everybody feels that they can be included here. So I think it's really become part of normal business now.
Yeah, I tend to agree that that certainly in my reporting, it's almost like the old argument of, oh, you're going to see better, innovation with diversity, which is true, but also it's the right thing to do. But people pushing back on the evidence-based of that. It's like, well, bottom line is, if you want contracts, you need to have your workforce reflect the population. I think that is something everyone's hearing now. Okay, we're sadly somehow completely out of time, and we're going to leave it there. And on behalf of the Globe, I'd like to thank Atria and Alicia for joining us today. I'm going to throw it back to the Globe's Deborah Arts to provide some concluding remarks for today's event. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Just have to be careful to turn off my mute button, and I think I've done so. So thank you so much, Robin, and thank you so much, Alicia and Atria. That was a completely riveting conversation and honest, and something that I am going to be thinking about for quite some time, I think. As we get ready to wrap up today's proceedings, I can't believe how quickly the last few hours have gone by. Few quick points to consider: that you will be receiving an email probably in about a week or so that'll contain a link to the recording of today's event, so you can go back and look at anything you might want to. There'll be all sorts of other details in that email too, of some of the things that we've referenced throughout the day today. You'll also receive a survey about your experience at today's event. We'd really appreciate it if you filled it out. That really does help us to do better all the time. We're always aiming to do that. Huge thanks to our panelists today, and all the speakers who spoke so openly and constructively, and to my wonderful colleagues Robin Doolittle, Rita Trichur, and Dawn Kalea for their spectacular moderating. We've got some really, really fantastic conversations today. To my unflappable colleagues in the Globe Events team, they make virtual events look very, very easy when we all know that they are anything but. Definitely, I would like to thank today's sponsors. Again, we couldn't have done this without their support and backing of this initiative. So thank you so much to our presenting sponsor, EY, to our gold sponsors, Citi and CPP Investments, to our supporting partner, Fortis, to the Report on Business Academic Advisory Board, the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. And thanks also to our brand partners, Amerigo Resources, First Capital REIT, H&R REIT, Prairie Sky Royalty, Rotman, Salesforce, and Urbanacorp. Finally, thank you to all of you who have tuned in today from across the country and beyond, for making time in your schedules when we all have a million demands on it for this important conversation. I hope you've learned something and picked up on some things that leave you a little bit inspired. I know for myself, one thing that has kind of come out of the through line of all today's conversations is example after example of powerful women who talked about how important it is not to mold to conventions, and how powerful it can be when women don't mold to the conventions. We are in a time of change in a massive, massive scale. Conventions are changing, and what it means to live, be a professional, and occupy professional space is changing. So, I'm feeling very compelled to lean into who I am, and others can lean into who they are, and be intentional about that, because there's really great power in that. So on that note, I think I would like to again thank you all for being here and officially close the 2021 Women Lead Here Summit. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you soon.